Hey guys, it's Dasha. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video, which is going to be an overview of all of my reading statistics for 2021. I am a stats nerd. I love looking at stats and keeping track of my reading. I find it really fun to look back at the specific numbers from month to month, and overall I think it's just a really interesting way to kind of see what you're reading and see if there's any areas for improvement. This year I used mainly 2 spreadsheets, although I found 3 that I kind of played around with. One is from Hardback Hoarder, the other is from Book Roast, and there's another one that I just found while Googling. All of them are on Google Sheets, so I will link them if I do find them again. But for 2022, I think I am going to be creating my own. I'll talk more about that at the end of the video, but for now, let's get into the stats for 2021. Like I said, I have 2 main spreadsheets that I used for these statistics, as well as the Goodreads kind of year in review that it gives you. So I'll be going based off of that. Oh, and Storygraph, because they actually give really interesting stats. So I've got my laptop here. Let's just get into it. So as of filming this, I have finished 77 books, but if we count the DNF'd books from this year, I have started 83 books this year. I did a little bit better than last year. Last year, I think I finished about 71, 72 books, if I'm not mistaken. So my reading has definitely improved in a numerical sense. When it comes to the pages, this one's a little bit interesting because one of the trackers that I have, Book Roasts, hers tracks the pages you read that are including DNFs. So whatever you read from a book that you DNF'd, you can input it and get an accurate number of the literal amount of pages you read. And then I have one that just tracks the number of pages that all the books that I started were, even though I DNF'd them. So technically I have only read, technically I've read 31,211 pages, but if we count the full length of all the books that I started, it would be 32,566 pages, which is an improvement on last year because I think I only finished about 27,000 pages. And my goal was to read 30,000 pages total for the year, so I smashed that goal. I'm pretty proud of myself because a soft goal for this year was to not be afraid of picking up big books, and I definitely did that. So I'm gonna keep my page goal as a soft goal for next year as well, but I'm glad that I was able to do it and crush that 30,000 number because that's pretty insane. I had 2 months this year where I read 10 books, which was the highest number. Both January and July, I finished 10 books. There were no DNFs those months. But when it comes to the highest number of pages between the 2 months, my highest month was July. I read 4,210 pages, which is a lot, actually. Unsurprisingly, December is the month where I read the least. I've only read 2 books so far, totaling to 964 pages. However, that's fine because I've been filming a ton of content and I've been doing like some family stuff, getting ready for Christmas. As you can see, I put the tree up finally. There is a mountain of gifts underneath. I've been pretty busy baking and all sorts of holiday stuff, so I'm not upset about that, and I have been still reading and enjoying some other things, so I'm okay with that. Other than that, I had 2 months where I finished 4 books. That's not true. I had a month where I finished 3, but I started 4. That was October, which we all know was a complete disaster for me. But yeah, December's been the lowest reading month so far, but that's totally understandable, and I am at peace with that. I DNF'd 6 books this year, 1 in May, 2 in August, 1 in September, 1 in October, and 1 in November, so my reading kind of went downhill, apparently. If you'd like to see a video where I talk about all the books that I've DNF'd, I will link it right up here. I kind of went over all of them, why I DNF'd them, what I thought of them, so you can go check that out if you're interested. In terms of reading method, 42 books, or 50.6% of the books I read were in physical format. 12 books, no, that's a lie. What is that number? 32 books, or 38.6%, were via ebook, and 9 books, or 10.8%, were audiobook. This makes a lot of sense. I wasn't driving a ton or just using audiobooks in general a lot. I tend to really enjoy them when I'm commuting, so there was not a lot of that this year. Similarly to last year, that number kind of plummeted compared to previous years. But the fact that I have about 50% of the books that I read physically means that I'm working through my own TBR, which is great because I don't borrow books physically from the library. So that means every physical book is a book that I own, so I'm very proud of myself. That's a lot of my own TBR that got reduced. I mean, to be fair, I brought a lot of books in and my own TBR has gone up, but at least we know I'm reading them, which is what counts. So now getting down into the detail of the books themselves, to absolutely no one's surprise, my highest read genre is fantasy. 32 of the books I read, or 38.6% of the books I read, were fantasy books. It's my favorite genre, of course. The next two are horror. I read 18 horror books, or 21.7%, which is kind of surprising. I didn't think I read that much, but thinking back, there was quite a few. And then the next was nonfiction, 16.9%, or 14 of the books I read this year were nonfiction. And that's a great number because at the beginning of 2021, I'd set myself a goal to read at least one a month, and I have crushed that. I did even better because I really gotten into nonfiction this last year. After that, we have 6 science fictions. We have a few thriller, mystery, historical fictions, literary fictions, and a few random things. Overall, I read across 10 different genres this year. Now, Storygraph also tracks the mood of the books you read, which I think is really interesting. I really enjoyed seeing, I mean, to be fair, like it just confirmed what I already knew. But it was kind of interesting to see what the overall moods are of the books I read. My largest category is, of course, dark. 41 of the books I read had the dark kind of mood attributed to it through Storygraph, which makes a lot of sense. But then the other largest category was adventurous. 36 of the books I read were adventurous, which I thought was really interesting. I never thought myself as reading like adventurous fantasy, but I guess maybe some of the horror that I read could be considered adventurous, and some of the nonfiction even. So it kind of makes sense, but it was definitely surprising to come across. After that, the next largest category was mysterious, 22 of the books I read, which makes total sense. I read thrillers, mysteries, and horror, which sometimes lean towards the obviously mysterious mood. So when it comes to star rating, my average rating for the year overall was 3.668, which is, if I'm not mistaken, a little bit lower than last year. I think last year was like 3.8 or something, but I did read a lot of different genres this year and things that I thought maybe would appeal to me or didn't, or my TBR game picked things for me that were not even on my radar necessarily, so there was a little bit of mixed bags thrown in this year. When it comes to distribution of ratings, 3-star was my biggest category. 28 books I read this year, I rated 3-star, or 38.4%. If we want to break it down like more specifically, 20 books that were 3 stars even, I had 8 that were 3.5, and I had 5 that were 2.5. So I think if you average it out, a lot of them would fall into the 3-star category. I had 19 books that were 4 stars. I had 5 that were 4.5 stars, and I had 13 that were 5 stars, which is interesting because I posted my best books of the year video and I did not have 13 books in there. There were some books that I rated 5 stars. Only a couple were rereads, but some that I definitely thought were 5 stars, but I would not consider like best or favorite. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I had 3 that were not rated because they were just so out there. I did have 3 2-star reads and 1 1.5-star read, which is a book that I haven't talked about on the channel yet because it's for a secret TBR, but it was just an absolute disaster. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's definitely more spread out than it's been in the previous years. I enjoy using half-star ratings. Sometimes you just can't pinpoint what a book is really, so I find they're really useful, and it ended up working because obviously I had 8 that were like 3.5 stars and I had 5 that were 2.5, and it just kind of, I don't know, it's interesting to see where I classify things because I find just having whole star ratings so not helpful because sometimes they're not all 3 stars are made equal. You know, sometimes they're 3.5, sometimes they're 2.5. So it was really interesting to see how many I ended up with of each. I'm also kind of surprised that I have almost an even number of 3 and 4 stars. That means that overall I'm not reading terrible books, which is pretty good. Or maybe I'm just too harsh if I have the same number. I'll have to sit down and reflect on that maybe. When it comes to age category, this one's not surprising at all. 69 of the books I read this year, or 83.1%, were in the adult category. The intended audience was adults, which makes a lot of sense. I've been definitely leaning more into the adult books. I find young adult just doesn't always hit. I find I've been disappointed more often than anything. So 13 of the books I read this year, or 15.7%, were young adult. When it comes to the source of these books, kind of similarly to like the format, this shouldn't be too surprising. 54.2%, or 45 of the books that I read were owned books because they were physical, so that makes sense. 2 of them were gifts. 15 I got from the library, and 21 I read on Scribd. I'm glad to see that Scribd represents a pretty large number because I do pay for it every month, so it's nice to know that I'm using it. And then publication year I thought was interesting because I thought I was picking up a lot of backlist titles, but the largest year I read from was 2020. 13 books, or 15.7%, were published in 2020, and I'm definitely surprised. I guess maybe just being on the bookish internet, I kind of hear about those titles more often, so I'm maybe a bit more influenced to pick them up. But I definitely thought that I was picking up more backlist. The next largest category was 2017. 8 books I read were published in 2017, which is kind of random. And then 7 books were published in 2018. So I don't know what to make of that. I guess I'm picking up backlist, just not as backlist. Because I read so much nonfiction and classics and random stuff, the rest is really spread out, to be honest. There's no largest trend. But it was definitely interesting to see that my largest publication year was 2020, because I thought I was picking up a lot more backlist than that. 36 books that I read this year were part of series, so that represents about 43.4%, which makes sense. I read a lot of fantasy. And 46 books, so 55.4%, were standalones. Again, I read a lot of nonfiction too, and horror, which are not part of series. So I'm not surprised that it's almost balanced because of the genres that I like to read. But I definitely would have thought that I had more series or books that were part of series, so I'm a little bit surprised that standalones make up more of it. But then again, I'm really bad at continuing and finishing series, so I should not be surprised, but I am a little bit. So moving on to the authors. Every time I read from an author more than once, I only tracked them once so that it wouldn't skew the statistics. And I also counted authors that were read before as authors that I've read prior to 2021. So I did read from the same author multiple times within the year, but I only counted them once, and it was whether I'd read them before 2021 or not. So the numbers are a little bit skewed, but 54 of the authors I read from this year, or 79.4%, were new to me, and 14 I had read from before 2021, which I thought was a little bit interesting. I didn't think it would be that high, to be quite honest with you. I can't even think of all of them, but I mean, I guess it's good that I'm picking up authors that I've read from before, that I want to read their backlist. I just didn't expect it to be that high, I guess. In terms of who it was written by, 50% of the books I read, or 35 books, were written by women. 31% were written, sorry, no, that's not true. 31 books, or 44.3%, were written by men, and I had 4 books that were written by multiple authors. I don't think I have any that were written by other gender identities as far as I know, or else I would have tracked that. I'm kind of surprised that 50% were women, because I thought that I'd read from more men, because I read a lot of horror, nonfiction, and fantasy. Then I realized that I read a lot of fantasy written by women, so I guess it shouldn't be too surprising, but the fact that it's 50% is a little bit surprising. When it comes to authors of color, 22 authors that I read from this year were authors of color, so that's about 32.8%, and then 45 were not. Like I said, I count authors only once, so there are series or authors that I've read multiple books from this year that were authors of color, but I only counted them once to make it fair. Same with white authors. So for example, Stephen Graham Jones, I read 3 of his books this year, but I only counted him once, and Leigh Bardugo, I read a ton of her books this year, but I only counted her once. Nationality was also a bit of an interesting one. Unfortunately, 46 of the authors I read from this year were American, and then there was a bit of a random mix. I had also a lot of Japanese authors, but then I also had an interesting mix. I had some French, I had some Chinese, British, Dutch, Argentinian, Iranian, and Australian. So I thought it was interesting that I at least got some other ones in there. I would like to read more works in translation next year, and I think by proxy that will mean more variety in the nationality of the authors. So I'm hoping that will be a bit more varied next year. But at the same time, it's often hard when you live in North America to find books that are not written by Canadian or American authors. Even though my Canadian section is pretty small too, so I don't know, maybe I'll have to work on that as well. Finally, the little Goodreads stats, I like these. So the average book length for my books in 2021 was 393 pages, which I think is pretty much on par with last year. The longest book I read was A Dance with Dragons by George R. R. Martin, coming in at 1,016 pages, and that's not surprising. And then the shortest book was Le Petit Prince, 87 pages. I mean, it's a children's book, so it makes sense. The most popular was also Le Petit Prince. 2,500,000 people also shelved the book, and the least popular was White Market Drugs, shelved by only 134 people, which makes sense. It's a very niche book published by a university press, so I'm not shocked at that. And then the highest rated on Goodreads was Full Metal Alchemist Volume 3, but the Full Metal edition, which it makes sense. It's one of those collector's editions that only diehard fans will probably have, so I'm not surprised. So I thought I'd go back and look for a more accurate answer, I guess. And so for that, we actually got Our Prison's Obsolete by Angela Davis, which has an average rating of 4.55, which makes a lot more sense. It's a bit more of like a universal book than friggin' like Full Metal Alchemist Volume 3, so I thought that was interesting. I would have thought it would be like The Invisible Life Fatty LaRue or something, but anyways, that was a lot. Those were all my stats for 2021. Now, I had mentioned that I was thinking of creating my own spreadsheet for myself to use for 2022 because I was kind of getting annoyed at using a couple of them and I wanted one that would do everything. The only downside to this is I'm not going to put the compile in it. I really like using the compile method sometimes to determine what my rating is, but I think I've gotten a lot better at cementing down how I feel about books and incorporating both objective and subjective opinions into my rating. So that's not going to have that, but I'm incorporating a lot of things that I like to track, things that I haven't seen in other trackers. I don't know if I'm planning on releasing it because I know it's not going to be for everyone. There's some things on it that I'm not going to track that some people enjoy tracking, but if you guys would like it, if you guys would like to maybe make a copy of it and then add whatever you would like to, just to have some kind of template for a tracker, let me know and I will maybe put a link to it in the description if enough people are interested. I don't know if people prefer making their own or whatever, and I don't know if I want to release mine because I'm like a baby when it comes to Excel and spreadsheets. Like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but it could be fun, and I know that not everyone wants to spend hours working on it because that's how long it took me. So if you're interested, do let me know. And other than that, I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check out my Bookmas playlist down below with all the other bookish end of the year things and looking ahead into the next year. My social media is also linked down there. You guys can come talk to me there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!